Blech.
Frumess talks about Halloween, Halloween, Halloween. Let's all talk about Halloween, Silver Shamrock.
And welcome to day 21 of 31 days of Halloween. Today's movie is a personal favorite of mine, The Frighteners, directed by Peter Jackson. It's produced by Zemeckis, and by some miracle, by some incredible feat, it feels like a Peter Jackson directed film, but with a total Zemeckis feel. It's a perfect blending of two sensibilities, and it really, really services the movie well. It was originally going to be a Tales from the Crypt movie. Zemeckis was heavily involved with the Tales from the Crypt series by HBO, and he also directed Death Becomes Her, which in my opinion is actually a secret Tales from the Crypt movie. There's nothing to say otherwise, other than it came out in 91 and sort of has that exact feel of a Tales from the Crypt episode. So I always call it a Tales from the Crypt movie. But so The Frighteners was going to be possibly the first official Tales from the Crypt movie. It was made the same time that they were making Demon Knight. And this is also when, they had gone into production From Dusk Till Dawn. There was a bunch of things that seemed to be in the running for the Tales from the Crypt moniker. What makes The Frighteners so fantastic is that it blends several films that come before it in just a wonderful way, and one film that comes after it. It combines Ghost, Patrick Swayze and Whoopi Goldberg and Demi Moore. You have Ghost. It takes some of that and mixes it with Ghostbusters, and then mixes that in turn with elements from the Flatliners, and then throw in a little bit of Final Destination and a twist and a pinch of Psycho, and you get The Frighteners. At the same time, it feels like it's doing a fresh, original thing, despite borrowing from so many elements. It still feels like its own vehicle. It doesn't feel like a total ripoff of any one of those things. And, what's really awesome, too, is that, the material it's dark material, it's heavy material, but the tone is so fun and light, and it's like you have like almost this adventure feel to it, this Back to the Future's vibe that, you have Michael J. Fox and Robert Zemeckis involved. You're going to get a Back to the Future vibe. You're going to get a little Marty McFly in there. And that makes the material that's so grave suddenly feel light and fun and fluffy. There's some wonderful sort of Easter eggs, I guess. I'm just going to go through these. I have a whole bunch of them. I never noticed this before, but when Cyrus backs up into a light bulb in Frank's unfinished house, because Frank lives, Frank Bannister, that's the name of the character, great name for a character. He lives in an unfinished house. He's a former architect. His wife died under tragic and mysterious circumstances, and he can see ghosts. And so he works with these ghosts, and they basically scam people out of their money. He works with these two ghosts. I think one's is Stanley and one is Cyrus. And Cyrus is like the 70s dude with that black guy with the afro. He falls back on the light bulb, and we kind of get that same light bulb effect that we get in Dead Alive when the girl, she dies in the kitchen, comes back as a zombie, and she lands backwards on a light bulb. Her back of her head goes into a light bulb, and then her head lights up, and that's how the fire starts in the house. So I didn't notice that. I was like, whoa. Another thing, too, he's eating Blueberry cereal. Frank Bannister, which I thought was really, really cool. There's a box of it, and then you actually see him chowing down on a bowl, which I thought was really great. And, this is an interesting movie because in this mythology, ghosts, they rot. Like, the ghosts rot, even though that there's no corporeal element to them. The stuff that they are made of, their earthly essence, does decompose. And the judge, played by John Astin so brilliantly, he's ready to just, rest his spirit because, he's getting too old for the haunt game, or as he calls it, putting on the Frighteners. Oh no, it's R.E. Limry, R.L. Limry, whatever the hell his name is. The drill sergeant from Full Metal Jacket. He's the one that calls it the Frighteners. I think they both call it the Frighteners. I was trying to upon rewatching it this time, I'm like, what does everybody want? Frank wants just to finish his house. So that was interesting to notice. Also, the clavicle organ is so great. It's like You know what I'm talking about? It's like that. It's like the same thing they use for Tales from the Crypt. Ding, 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 ding. There's the score is heavy with it, and that's what gives it some of that light, fluffy, playful tone. And I kind of thought throughout the film that Frank kind of has a death wish with his careless driving. That's how his wife died, and it gets him into trouble. Like when he crashes into Ray and Lucy's front lawn, and that's what he realizes that he's gonna have to pay for all these garden gnomes. So he sends his ghost friends to scare them, so he can kind of make the whole thing a wash. The ghosts describe themselves as earthly emanations, and the earthly emanation is a rotting cloud of bioplasmic particles dripping in ectoplasm. That's what ghosts are, at least in the Frighteners world. And, Ray finds himself a ghost mysteriously. We don't know why. Again, there's a mystery being unraveled here. And it seems like the specter of death is just randomly knocking people off in this town called Fairwater. But, a day after Frank clears his house of ghosts, trying to do his whole scheme thing, Ray dies. And then suddenly Lucy is this bereaved widow. And she's played by Trini Alvarado. And she is, I don't know what it is about her. She's breathtaking to me. She's such a beauty, and such a great actress, so much charisma. I felt such chemistry between her and Michael J. Fox, and it's just a crime that she's not in more stuff. Everybody is great in this film, by the way. Every single person, hands down. Like, you can't, and honestly, I could talk about the Frighteners for 3 hours. I really could. So I'm really just touching on various things. Otherwise, this will be an hour long, and it can't be an hour long because I got places to be. But everybody's performance is phenomenal. What's interesting is Arlie Emery reprises his role unofficially from Full Metal Jacket. He's the drill sergeant. He's the ghost of the drill sergeant, which means that the events in Full Metal Jacket occurred before the events of the Frighteners, which makes sense as they are 8 years apart in time. Well, no, actually, no, that would have happened in the 70s because of the Vietnam War. Full Metal Jacket came out in 1987, but that kind of makes Frighteners a accidental sequel, or makes Full Metal Jacket an accidental prequel by having this character played by the same actor who's clearly playing the same guy. He's called Hyle in Hile in the Frighteners. I don't remember what his drill sergeant name was in Full Metal Jacket, but it's definitely the same character, and it connects the two films in the same way that Overlord is a prequel to Saving Private Ryan, because it takes place right before D-Day, and the mission is predicated on, or D-Day's success is predicated on this mission that's happening very close to where D-Day is happening. So I love it when movies do that. I think it's really, really great. It's also interesting too, Ray's funeral, there's a man standing in the background with a white handlebar mustache and a bolo tie, and he's just I never noticed him before, and he's just such a colorful extra, and I wonder what his story is. And everybody's sort of like, the saddest person at Ray's funeral is Ray himself. He's like crying hysterically at his own funeral. Nobody is nearly as upset as Ray. Although I suppose anybody would feel the same way if you were at your own funeral. I mean, this is really macabre, trippy, heavy stuff to contemplate normally, but through the lens of Peter Jackson and, through the playful tone of Robert Zemeckis, it just doesn't feel as grim as maybe it should be. And then, the one time that Frank has an opportunity to be a medium with Lucy, because Lucy comes to Frank, after the whole situation. She never once doesn't believe in Frank. Everybody thinks Frank is a fraud. Lucy's the only one that believes in him from the beginning. She's drawn to him for some reason, and she becomes drawn to him even further once she finds out that he too is a widow. They're both widowers. And she's attracted to the sadness that's inside him. It makes them kindred spirits, And she just always believes in him. So she goes to him. She says, "Is there anything from Ray?" At first Ray's really excited because Ray's following Frank around, and he's going, what does she want? What does she want to know? What does she want to know? And, Lucy's upset because she lost, Ray invested $16,000 and blew it on a bad investment for Lucy. So she has no money, or she lost a bunch of money, and, her marriage to Ray was not well. And it's just interesting how, here are these moments for Frank to truly, be the thing that he's always usually scamming people on, be the medium. And he's very apprehensive about it. Like, he's not like fully fledged into it. You would think that the guy who's always tricking people, when he finally gets an opportunity to do the thing, that it would be effortless. And it's not. It's like it seems to have the reverse effect. And then, also they end up taking the reservation that Ray made for Lucy and him at Excalibur, which is the restaurant. It's the restaurant where they had their first date or something, and it's kind of like a medieval times type place. Really fun, interesting place. The film was shot in New Zealand, despite the movie taking place in America. They go there. The waiter asks Lucy, "Do you want white wine or red wine?" And she picks white instead of red. Ray is boasting about how they always have red wine. He's shocked to see that Lucy wants something else. She wants a change in her life. Her former life with her husband is over, and she's ready to admit. She says, "I never liked red." So clearly Ray was always, making assumptions and ordering stuff for them, or making decisions for her that maybe she didn't want to, make, that kind of thing. Then, we meet Dammers, right? Dammers comes into the picture. There's a dude dies in the bathroom. Frank gets brought into the cop station. Of course, Lucy, again, she thinks he's innocent the whole time. We meet Agent Dammers, who's investigating this series of murders because, there was this brutal killing, where 12 people died. And, there's this girl who's played by Dee Wallace. She plays an older woman who was associated with Jake Busey's character, John Bartlett. They committed a bunch of murders 30 years prior, and she's been like kind of under house arrest. And we learn her whole backstory, yada yada yada. And there have been a series of murders since those original 12 murders. And Agent Dammers from the FBI, played by the brilliant Jeffrey Combs, he comes in to sort of investigate things. And, he's just, I literally, again, I told you I could do a whole hour on the Frighteners. I could do a whole hour on Agent Dammers alone within the Frighteners. Agent Dammers is one of my favorite characters of all time, from one of my favorite character actors of all time. He is just, he's the best, man. There's a little bit of Herbert West in Dammers. Agent Dammers is the perfect example for when you give a character actor the free rein to sort of create within a character space and build their own sort of backstory and, eccentricities and quirks into said character to make them really unique. And, he just elevates the film. He is a minor antagonist. He's not the main antagonist, but he's a minor antagonist, and he just elevates everything. For the role, Combs put little spacers behind his ears to make his ears stick out. He gave himself a Hitler haircut. He's wearing contact lenses that make his pupils look really dilated, as if he's perma-tripping. They're just pure black eyes. He's got all these weird tics. I don't know if that was the writing of Peter Jackson, Fran Walsh, or if, Combs came up with the idea that he can't hear women screaming because it unnerves him. And it obviously unnerves him because of his backstory, which I never put together. He probably heard a lot of women screaming, and it gives him PTSD. It's probably a PTSD tic that we all kind of comedically laugh at. He's also got hemorrhoids, and he wears leather gloves that squeak a lot. And all of these things just really add to the character, man. They're just great. They're just these great little touches that just really make every scene just like a savory steak. As I said, this is character work at its finest. Combs was allowed to bring stuff in and put spacers behind. Yeah, we already said that. When Dammers is flashing back, and in general, throughout the whole film, you get this signature move of Peter Jackson. He does close-ups with these wide-angled lenses and kind of pushes in on the close-up, and it gives this, sort of quality, this sort of comic book-like, I don't know what it is, over-exaggeration, stylistic quality to his work that makes it so signature. It's a Peter Jackson movie when you're watching it. And it seems to be sort of influenced by some early Sam Raimi. Raimi is like that too. And there's like a physicality to the camera work that really just sort of, puts his stamp on the scene. I don't know how else to say it. In the flashback that Dammers is telling, they're going through the history of Banner's history. Dammers telling the story, and we're flashing back, and Michael J. Fox looks like a sleazy big shot in a suit, and his swagger communicates everything we need to know about Frank without saying a single word, like what he was like 5 years ago as this big shot architect. It made me wonder, who would Michael J. Fox play in the MCU, because he's just got such a charisma in this role, and I'm just trying to think, like, who is he in the MCU? I couldn't figure that out. He the other thing about Dammers too is every time that like he talks, it's like he's imagining. It's like he's reliving things that he never actually experienced. So he tre- you know he has like tremors, and he sort of like shakes and is over exaggerated in his movements as he talks. It's just really, really great. And this is where you really hear that squeaking of Dammers' leather gloves. I also think this movie should have had its own video game. I feel like it really lends itself. Like, I could imagine it on like the Sega Genesis, the Frighteners. It'd just be really great. Then they Frank, I guess Frank is leaving the cop. I forgot what happened. He leaves the cop station. I'm trying to remember, what's the connective tissue. He gets to a museum. There's more murders, right? The judge starts having sex with a dead mummy. He goes, "They don't call me the hanging judge for nothing." And that jawbone coming out of the judge's jaw is just so great. It's so great. It's such like it really adds like a level of physicality to his makeup that makes him feel like he's really falling apart. It's kind of like the hip bones on the Tarman suit in Return of the Living Dead. Like there's very little that's holding him together. And we got this scene where the ghost bud is humping up and down. It's really, really great. And this is one of the last times that we see Peter Jackson's crude roots from his splatter films, his early splatter work. That's like the last time you really see that out of Peter Jackson. I don't think you see it. You don't see it at all in Lord of the Rings. You don't see it in King Kong. He just sort of, he became a mainstream filmmaker. This is that film. This film is the bridge between being a mainstream filmmaker and being that DIY independent filmmaker that he was. And I took a note here, the newspaper lady, she's just, before she dies, she's such a great character, man. Ray's a great character. The sheriff's a great character. Lucy is a phenomenal character. Like, she's so wonderful. And again, I love her eternal belief in Frank. It's really, really great. I mentioned that, they wind up back at the police station after the museum situation. He's getting locked up. Frank's getting locked up again or whatever. And way before we see the hemorrhoids joke with like the little inflatable, pillow that he puts down on the seat, we see Dammers, when he's interrogating Frank, and this scene is so good. It goes for a really long time, and it's just a masterful scene where Dammers just gets to chew the fat. He chews the fat of this scene, and he makes an attempt to sit in a chair and becomes very uncomfortable and stands back up to continue his meticulous dissertation on paranormal activity in relation to Frank and what he thinks is going on with Frank. And it's just a nice little note that I never really noticed. And Combs, he's commanding the scene as Jackson is, he's doing that zooming kinetic wide close-ups in the interrogation, that same style I was talking about, just full on with it. I love seeing Cyrus and Stanley walking through the whole police station and into the jail cells. It's just really well done. It shows, like, we see cross sections as we see how easy it is for ghosts to sort of navigate the physical world, And then, the whole time I'm kind of trying to understand, what does Frank what does Dammers want? Like, what does he want in this film? I've been trying to figure that out, man. And one thing is certain, he wants Frank to die. He wants Frank to die. It's almost like he wants Frank to die because it will put an end to his work business there. He talks resentfully prior about getting all the fruity cases. It's really annoying for him, and we learn later why all of that is. He has this psychotic break. It's not really a psychotic break. I think it's part of a pattern, but we'll get to that. Lucy makes it to Frank's unfinished house and sees the garden that Frank talks about. Frank talks about how he put in a basketball hoop when his wife wanted a garden, and that was their last time they ever spoke. They were fighting about, her having a place in her garden because he was designing their house, They were building and designing the house. And that's when Frank, who was drunk, took a turn off of a cliff, and it caused her to fly out of the car. And that's when Patricia, the character played by Dee Wallace, and Johnny Bartlett, played by Jake Busey, that's when they take her out. But Lucy really gets to revel in Frank's genuine nature, and it's all the proof that Lucy needs to know that Frank isn't a bad guy at all, like everybody is saying. Despite the fact that there is plenty of evidence that shows that he is a bad guy and that he did set them up for a scam. She's unconcerned by it, completely, and I love it. And then we get this wonderful answering machine plot device that drives the plot. She heads back over to Patricia's house. There's this whole scene with Patricia earlier. We learned that she's kind of haunted or whatever. We don't know why yet. She goes back over to Patricia's mother's house because she hears that Patricia's mother is saying, Mr. Bannister, we need your help because my daughter's communing with evil spirits. And she knows way more. She knows what the deal is. She knows what Patricia's really up to. And, Patricia's just ultimately this brilliant red herring. She claims that Johnny Bartlett's ashes are actually her father's, and she's just totally lying to Lucy. She's the ultimate manipulator. She uses her childlike innocence to sort of trick people, and the only person that can see through it is her mother, and Johnny Bartlett, who's pulling the strings from behind the scenes, and this is where I mentioned, as I said earlier, Lucy is deeply attracted, but not sexually per se. She just feels herself drawn to Frank because, he has experienced the same pain of loss that she is going through. When Lucy becomes marked, because what's happening is these marks are showing up when the murders are happening. These numbered marks show up on people's foreheads, and that's how we know that they're doomed. They're going to be the next ones that are going to be reaped by this mysterious reaping figure, which turns out to be Johnny Bartlett on the low. He's disguising himself as death. And when he finds that out, Frank is ready to murder himself in order to become a spirit to fight Bartlett. He doesn't know it's Bartlett yet, but he's willing to do this. And Lucy, who doesn't want to lose Frank, she doesn't want to let him go. She says there's another way, and this is where the Flatliners element kind of comes in. They lower his body temperature and, shoot him up with something, and it allows him to have an out-of-body experience that he needs to fight and to sort of play defense for Lucy. And she's kidnapped by Dammers, the first romantic moment we see between Lucy and Frank, we've seen some hugs and some hand-holding, but then they kiss through the door and it's cold. It's because they're turning down the temperature to sort of give Frank his out-of-body experience, and it kind of represents how their love is very slowly unthawing, or as it's thawing, the love grows, and they have this hand touch and this kiss on the door. It's very sweet. I shipped this hard. I really did. I love it. I love seeing it. And again, Dammers wants Frank dead. He wants to leave him in cold storage, and he takes Lucy to the cemetery, right? And then we learn that he is basically suffering from years and years and years of deep undercover work. He's PTSD. He was a sex slave for the Manson family for 6 months. He says, he was drinking goat's blood for 3 years in another cult. And, eventually he was involved with ritualistic cannibalism in orgiastic dances, reaching painful thresholds of intense physical eroticism. And as he rips his shirt open, and he doesn't have the lead breastplate anymore that he has under there, we see all of these crazy scars. We see swastikas on his hand, tattooed on his hands. We see satanic pentagrams and weird scars. He's missing his nipples. It looks like his nipple was ripped off. And he says, "My body," it's like, this is a super quotable one, "My body is a roadmap of Wayne. It's like so great. And here's the thing, I think Dammers does this a lot. He singles out a woman that he thinks that he can open up to, or in any individual, and he kind of takes them through this whole rigmarole. And that's what he's doing with Lucy, you know? And later on at the hospital, he says to her, he says, "You're all the same." Like, he does this over and over and over again. It's part of his sort of his act. At 91 minutes into the director's cut, because that's what I'm watching, the director's cut, which has 14 minutes of extra footage, and I don't think it's gratuitous. I think that it has a place in there, just character moments that add to the story. Does it need to be in the theatrical cut? No, the theatrical cut works fine on its own. I rarely say that. I love director's cuts, but it's always nice to watch, you know, all the extra trimmings. At this point, it's almost unrecognizable to me. I don't know what the theatrical cut is anymore. I only know the director's cut. At 91 minutes into the director's cut, we head into what I think must be Act 3, and Act 3 begins once we learn that Johnny Bartlett is the Death Grim Reaper character, because Michael J. Fox, Frank Bannister, he successfully beats down the ghost and all the ghosts in the cemetery, some of which are victims of the original Johnny Bartlett murders. Thank Frank for avenging his death. And, you know, as Johnny Bartlett's putting himself together, because Frank shot him with some protoplasm machine guns from the drill sergeant, he looks like a duty man. It's really funny. It's just really crude, bad CGI. And here's the thing about CGI that I've learned. If a movie is really good, if the story is really good and the CGI is dated and we recognize that it's dated, we don't care. I did not care. I do not care that the CGI looks kind of gummy in a lot of this stuff. It's at the dawn of brand new CGI technology that's the birth of Weta, you know, Peter Jackson's company. And, you know, this is the reason why Weta exists. Weta exists because they needed computers for the Frighteners. You know, that's why they do Lord of the Rings. They do Lord of the Rings because they have 32 computers and they don't know what to do with them. You know, it's kind of interesting when you think about it like that. I wrote that in this world, Dee Wallace's character, Patricia, her psychosis is driven by ghosts, you know, like normally, sometimes in stylizations of mental illness. Mental illness is a very real, very serious thing. Obviously, we know this, right? But in very, like, in certain cinematic depictions of mental illness, we find out that mental illness is caused by some factor. Maybe it's something that's driving the story. In this case, the psychosis seems to be caused, her mental illness is caused by murderous ghosts. It's kind of interesting when you think about it. Murderous ghosts tell her what to do, which is, you know, coupled with, you know, what, you know, in real life, schizophrenics, when they talk about demons in their head and stuff like that. And this is like a cinematic sort of exaggeration of something that happens to people in the real world. I'm not saying that people in the real world are plagued by ghosts. I'm just saying that, like, it's just interesting to see how you know, you would think that normally you would just think that Patricia is suffering from mental illness, but when in fact that she is just seeing ghosts, that's what's causing her to act this way, to talk to things that are not there, essentially, to other people. It's also interesting that she has a paranormalized sexual relationship with Bartlett that involves pegging. Do you know what pegging it is? Pegging is? Take a guess at what pegging is. It's when, you know, someone puts a strap on, and usually someone without the equipment for that, and replace. It's usually someone who doesn't have the right equipment for, you know, being the pitcher, for being the top, as they call it, right? And the bottom is the peggee, the one who's getting pegged by the person who doesn't have the right equipment for being the pegger, so they use a strap-on to do so. And basically, Patricia and Johnny are doing this pegging with a knife. She is pegging him with a knife, and he loves it. I thought that was interesting. There's a really great red backlight that kind of comes over Patricia as she turns on a dime and she goes full psycho as she tries to kill Lucy. I thought that was pretty great. She just spins on a dime. And, you know, the whole time in her performance, she's channeling a girl who never grew up. It's really great. Eventually, they need to get Johnny's ashes onto consecrated ground or something so that he could pass over and they can be rid of his evil spirit. And there's a whole stalking third act, lots of suspense, lots of fighting, and yada yada yada. Dammers gets his head blown off with a shotgun. It's great. And Frank figures out how to rip a soul from a body. He kind of dies from his injuries, but then he comes back. And he basically lures Johnny's spirit into the spirit realm by ripping Patricia's spirit out of her body and getting sucked up. And it's just a really cool sequence. The wire work, watching them float, I don't know, it's just very interesting. It was very well done. And then we see that they're actually in the mouth of a giant worm, or that this portal can turn into the mouth of a giant worm, depending on whether you're a good boy and girl or pronoun, whatever, or bad, and get sucked back down into hell, and that hell sucks. And then Frank, he turns back around and gets to live life on Earth with Lucy, bulldozes the house. Sheriff comes, he wants to write a book with Frank about the experiences, and Frank's like, I don't want to do that, Sheriff. And, the sheriff reveals that Patricia, in information that we totally didn't need to know, we could have been shown, frankly. You could have just kept a stack of Ouija's in a closet or something. She used a bunch of Ouija boards when she got out. I guess what happened was she was locked up for many, many years, and then she got put on house arrest 5 years prior to the events. And that's when the killing started again, when she got back out. That's why it all started up. They continued the grisly work of Johnny Bartlett. They got to number 12 because that's what Johnny wants. All Johnny wants to do is just have the highest body count so he can brag to the souls of other serial killers. And we find out, and Frank literally says, nice epilogue. It's the filmmakers, it's Jackson and Walsh and Zemeckis and whoever else is going we know that we're writing a cheesy epilogue and we don't care and we're putting in, it's great. And then Lucy, the Don't Fear the Reaper comes on as the ending song, and it's so perfect for this movie. It's the perfect button. I put it right up there with Where Is My Mind for Fight Club. Where Is My Mind is the perfect end credit song for Fight Club, and just what a great way to end the film. Same thing with this, right? Same thing with Don't Fear the Reaper. It's literally perfect. And you know what else would have been good too? Don't Fear the Reaper would have also worked well as the end song for Scream. If I had my druthers, that's what I would do. And I'm sure I skipped over a lot of stuff. Like I said, this is a very truncated review. I will be talking about this film on a podcast, the Real 96 podcast, with my friends Nathan, Michael, and Bob. We're all in the Genre Blast Film Festival community. Nathan runs it, and we're doing that. So shout out to those guys. I'm very excited to talk about this movie with them. And, I just I figured I might as well use this as my review for 31 Days of Halloween. So that's what I did. Tune in tomorrow for another review for another movie. I got to tell you, this was really tough. This was hard to do, 31 movies in 31 days with a video review. I did twice this amount of movies last year just by watching films, one after the other, after the other, after the other. It was also a little bit different because my daughter wasn't going to school and there was less to do. But this year was very challenging. I don't think I will do this again, the video thing. I think I'll just keep it. I will just keep it as a private sort of thing that I do on my own. I don't know. Maybe we'll see. We'll see.